Hey there folks, welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today we're going to be talking about the newest album from 21 Pilots, the sophomore album, Blurryface. I get the feeling that a lot of people kind of missed the point of my first 21 Pilots review. Now granted, that review dropped back in 2013, back when I was still getting my sea legs on YouTube, and I'll freely admit that many of those early reviews were not the best things that I've ever written. But still, considering how positive that I was on their major label debut Vessel on Fueled by Ramen, the backlash that I got from it did take me kind of off guard. But then again, the more I think about it, the more I'm not exactly surprised by this, because let's be honest here, 21 Pilots is a weird, awkward sort of group, straddling the lines between electronica, indie pop rock, emo, and even rap. And their major label debut showed even more of the stress smarts of that fusion rather than the actual synthesis. But for as much as I thought that Tyler Joseph really could use a little bit more seasoning behind the microphone, and they really were crying out for a bass guitar, I saw enough potential in the songwriting and melodic composition to give the band a lot of praise. And hell, I get why a duo like this develops a cult following even if their mainstream debut didn't take off with the same force. They're too unique of a group not to have a cult following. That being said, going back to Vessel, I do feel that I overrated that album a little bit, as it's very much a product of its time. And the overall awkwardness of that release can toe a line between kind of charming and, well, kind of grating. On the other hand, I've been anticipating their follow-up record, Blurryface, a fair bit more. Mostly because the lead-off singles have actually been pretty damn awesome, really showing Tyler Joseph getting a lot stronger as a singer, and with some welcome improvements in the songwriting department. In other words, it looked like the genre fusion was coming together a lot better, so I definitely made sure to dig into Blurryface. What do we get with it? Well, I can say this. Blurryface by 21 Pilots might just be one of my favorite albums thus far this year. Man, I thought I overrated their previous album, but the more I hold up Vessel in comparison, I see major improvements on Blurryface from every angle. Maybe it's the greater budget or higher creative freedom, or maybe just the maturing of Tyler Joseph as a songwriter and performer, but 21 Pilots put together a much more intriguing, focused, cohesive album while still maintaining the vibrantly unique sound that's still a little bit all over the place, but works a lot better for it. And yeah, on some level, this album is still just a little bit awkward and up its own ass, but the self-referential nature works in the best way possible. That reminds me a lot of the self-titled record from Icon for Hire back in 2013. If you remembered how much I loved that album, that's saying something. So okay, how the hell did 21 Pilots manage to pull this off? Well, let's start off in the area where I think the greatest improvements have taken place. Tyler Joseph himself. My biggest issue with that previous album was that his awkward, self-effacing nature came across a little bit lacking in polish, showing real discomfort in the spotlight even despite his real talent. Now, given the subject matter, some of that was bound to stick around, but Joseph is just so much more assured, controlled, and his voice has matured naturally this time around. He sounds way more comfortable on these anthemic, theatrical tracks, and he's got the personality to finally pull it off. A particular note here, his falsetto, which has a clarity and energy to it that doesn't sound willowy or thin. It sounds fantastic. And then you his rapping, which is faster, sharper, and flows significantly better with his instrumentation. As I said in this last album, he's better than most rappers in the mainstream these days. If I'm gonna find flaws with his vocals, it'd probably be in his attempts to dip into his lower range on songs like Hometown. I mean, it's still pretty good, but you can tell it's not his natural wheelhouse, and I get the feeling that some of that depth will come more with age, so it's just a matter of time here. And of course, there's the pitch shifting. Now, to my surprise, it wasn't terrible, but it did detract from songs like Message Man and Stressed Out more than I was hoping, ultimately making them some of the weaker tracks on this album. But to be honest, it wasn't much of a detraction, because now we need to talk about the instrumentation and the production, and this is where 21 Pilots made a lot of improvements here too. My biggest issues with Vessel in this area were that it could occasionally feel top-heavy, without stronger mid-range grooves, and the synth tones are very much of its time and a little bit chintzy, and unable to back up that theatrical pretension, and Blurryface fixed all of that. The immediate comparison for me is Fall Out Boy's Folie Deux, or maybe Pretty Odd by Panic at the Disco, both albums that crank the bombast up to 11, and feature a much greater breadth in their instrumental ambition, but neither quite tackle the genre bending that 21 Pilots tackles here, leaping from icy hip-hop and modern synth-pop to bright bombastic piano-driven pop rock and even reggae. And while there's a part of me that does wish that the couple electric guitar tones that do show up aren't as compressed, or that the bass guitar a little bit more of a rollicking groove throughout the album, the melodic compositions and flow are so prominent, vibrant, and energetic that they make an album that's nearly an hour long feel significantly shorter, even with all the change-ups that flow together shockingly well. And there's really so many great moments which to choose from. The more progressive drumming and warped shrieking tones of Heavydirtysoul that bleeds into the piano so well, the frigid turgid symphonic crunch of Fairly Local that I've talked about before, the oscillating wind that whirls about the judge before breaking into a bouncy ukulele groove, which later returns in the bass-heavy We Don't Believe What's on TV, that features a great horn accent on the chorus I really liked, or even the reverb-touched mid-80s synth pop of Hometown that features some very welcome guitar notes. And I'll admit, flashbacks towards Magic made me very wary of the reggae elements, but 21 Pilots are smart enough to give the bass some real rollicking presence and power, and have plenty of oily organs and buzzing synthesizers to fill out the entire mix. Like on Ride, the skittering rollick of Lane Boy, or the eerie Polarize that I could swear interpolates a melody from Requiem for a Dream. Even the more conventional sounding tracks on this album kick ass instrumentally. Tear in My Heart is a pretty standard piano-driven pop song, but that synth crescendo has a ton of presence. A crescendo later echoed on the gentle organ segments that drive the big band horns that splits Not Today into the killer outro song that'll inevitably end their concerts. Hell, even on songs that sound the most commercial, like the auto-tune saturated melancholy of Doubt that sounds pulled straight from 2010, or the sharply staccato Imagine Dragons inspired Message Man, still have enough groove and melody to really stick with you. There isn't a bad song on this album. But now we have to come to the lyrics and themes, and the overarching question of how the hell 21 Pilots could ever reconcile smashing all those genres and styles together. And yet they did it in a way that not only added thematic cohesion, but actually plays to Tyler Joseph's emotive strengths, because Blurryface is a record about itself, or at least the underlying insecurities that would come with making a bigger, grander follow-up sophomore record like this. Now this isn't a new concept. Hell, in 2013 both Fall Out Boy and the previously mentioned band Icon for Hire made albums diving into their own creative process and relationship that they have with their audience. But 21 Pilots finds a nice middle ground between both those albums, with a social commentary played with a defter touch and a far less antagonistic relationship with the audience than Fall Out Boy had on Save Rock and Roll. Instead, Tyler Joseph takes the insecurities that come with having to make a follow-up and grounds his entire album in that internal creative arc, turning rockstar bombast inside out to dig into what's really underneath it for him. Now, if all that sounds a little bit up its own ass, you wouldn't be that wrong. Even with self-referential themes and writing them this fringes of emo, there's a limit to this sort of thing, one that Max Bemis ran headlong into with Hebrews last year. At some point, it gets hard to make this brand of indecision and paralysis compelling, even as Tyler Joseph tries to pare away that part of his nature into cleaner lines and cleave away the blurry face part of his persona. Thankfully, he's got a couple tricks in his arsenal that adds a ton to the framing and makes it work. The first, always placing this arc with respect to its audience, either through songs like The Judge, where the titular character is plainly the listener, or actively breaking the fourth wall, which he does frequently in terms of talking about the songs themselves. He knows the audience is the real judge of his success. And even on the most commercial tracks, he pleads not to be forgotten, an apt metaphor of how often that happens in music. And while the music industry is always an easy antagonist on records like this, and they do take their fair share of shots on Fairly Local, Stressed Out, Lame Boy, Message Man, and We Don't Believe What's on TV, 21 Pilots are aware that the real issues that are coming on this album, they come back to themselves as a duo. For as much as it's implied that the industry wants to define a lane for them, Joseph has been given the freedom to cross producers and genres with impunity on Blurryface. And the real villain here, it's his insecurity. And the key thing is that Joseph knows this all along throughout the entire record. And while he's tempted to retreat back into the womb of past inspirations represented by his hometown and his family, he knows that this album, as it reaches its final tracks, he needs to step towards the rest of the world, and his plea to simply be known by you has a lot of real weight to it, at least for me. And to give him a lot of credit, he's at least mature enough to know that even as it's kind of uncertain that future and bound to give him challenges that he might not be able to surmount, Joseph's gonna take that step, leaving the rest in your hands. The raw emotional honesty of this proposal giving it a lot of real punch. So yeah, in the end, Blurryface by 21 Pilots might appear to be a genre-blurring oddball mess, but beneath it is an incredibly strong and thematically rich core that shows the band improving across the board, and the fact they wrote great anthemic songs along the way is even better. Now granted, it's not the sort of album that the band can ever repeat. The thematic arc is very much self-contained, they can't really do this again, but for a sophomore release, it fills the role amazingly well. I'm thinking a light 9 out of 10, and a huge recommendation from me. Folks, if you were kind of put off by the odd quirks of Blurryface brings them into a much tighter, potent package, and it easily stands a shot as one of my favorite records thus far in 2015. Definitely make time to check this out. It really is something special. And there's nothing blurry about that at all. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. Is there anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, or any other albums coming out that you want me to take a look at? I'd be more than happy to give them a listen if I've got the time. Until then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.